Now I know that this story may sound fictional. A lot of people don't believe me when I tell it, but I can assure you that the other persons involved also witnessed what occurred that strange night. So this happened 11 years ago with my ex-girlfriend. It actually changed our relationship for the worse, and we ended up breaking up a few weeks after this too. Nonetheless, I still remember this like it was yesterday due to how unexplainable it was. My girlfriend at the time wanted to surprise me with what she said was an overnight surprise trip. I obliged, and felt like I was a pretty lucky guy for her to do something of that. Required so much planning like that after packing a duffel bag full of clothes and toiletries. We left for what I thought was a resort or some kind of hotel stay. 2.5 hours passed when we pulled off a main road and headed down an off-road path. So I asked her if this was a camping trip, and she replied yes. To be honest, I was sort of disappointed as I didn't really like camping all that much, and not to mention I wish that I knew to pack my hiking shoes and all that. But I didn't complain, of course, because it was still a romantic gesture. 15 minutes on this rough road, we finally pulled into a camping ground. The first thing that I noticed was that there really wasn't anyone around us. It made sense, though this was really far off the beaten path. I was actually surprised her car made it that far out, considering how harsh the road was, to be honest. But anyway, we made a fire pit and she cooks dinner. Everything is going just fine, and we're really feeling each other. We of course take it to the tent as the sun goes down, and we're vibing off of each other, and yeah, it's what you would expect would happen as we begin moving things along as young college-age kids do. But this is where the first strange occurrence happens. I hear scratching noises on the side of the tent. I try to remember if we set the tent up next to brush or something, maybe. The wind is causing branches to rustle against the tent. And I mean, oh, well, that's the woods, right? But maybe it's a bird or something else too. It stops rustling, and we continue chilling as if nothing happened. But then things escalate in a really strange way. It's like the wind stopped and the environment just became perfectly silent. We both felt uneasy, causing us to get sort of knocked out of our playful mood. I guess you could say she laid next to me as we tried to concentrate on listening, to hear if there was a bear or some other animal in the area or something. But then it happened in an instant. Something akin to an explosion hit the tent tremendously hard. I could compare it to as if, say, maybe a log was thrown in like a battering ram against the side of the tent. And I say this because it literally pushed the material in forcefully and felt dangerous. In fact, a surge of adrenaline lit through my body as I felt like something violent was outside the tent. I never knew if I was a flight or fight guy, but I guess my next action gives me some idea, and I yelled aloud, "Give me the knife and the flashlight," as I scrambled up and unzipped the tent with tools in hand. My first thought was that I was going to confront some psycho that was messing with us, perhaps with a baseball bat or some kind of battering weapon, but I kid you not. I launched myself out of that tent and stood up in a flurry to confront my attacker. A few breaths passes, a cold feeling sets in. I do a 360 scan, to nothing. Nothing but silence and darkness. Maybe it was a branch that fell on the tent, but no, there was absolutely nothing on the ground where the thud was heard and felt. I yelled out hello again and again to no response until only a moment later. In the silence, a chill shot up my spine. "I get the keys and get out of the tent," I said in a frantic tone as my girlfriend listened and now joined me. And I looked at a car that we arrived in and noticed that it was about 30 yards out by the shoddy off-road path. She didn't even need to know what I was thinking, as we both just started to speed walk towards it. Now you might be thinking at this point that I'm just overreacting, but truly, I cannot describe the terror that washed over me when I looked out in the darkness after investigating the tent. That night I could feel like something was watching me, and to top it off, It was eerily silent too. I know that she confirmed my suspicions too when she started for the car immediately without question. Our instincts were telling us to get the heck out of there quickly, and the walk to the car was really unnerving and felt like a football field away. But finally we get into the car with the keys in hand, and I took the driver's seat after turning the keys led to some relief as the engine started instinctively. I locked the doors and turned the headlights on. We sat for about 3 seconds trying to rationalize what was happening when my girlfriend started exclaiming, "My laptop is moving." "Something is in the tent," she said. This because she brought her laptop to serve as a lantern after dark. We of course left it in a hurry as well as other items. But I saw what she saw. It was items being rustled around 30 yards away. But without further hesitation I put the car in gear and started down the rough road as I tried to calmly drive the car down the dirt path quickly, but carefully. It was a very rough road and I didn't want to get stranded out there. The strangest thing happened next. A loud, piercing, sort of ringing noise rang from inside the car's cabin. I turned the radio on and off. I checked the windows. I asked my girlfriend if her car had never made such noises and she replied, "No." I asked her again if she could hear it. Maybe it was just me being under stress. And she said, "Yes, I hear it." I don't know what that is though now. I wanted to write this off as a car problem. But if you were in there with me, you would describe it as some kind of, I don't know, like bell continuously ringing. It didn't sound like any car noise that I had ever heard before. But my next instinct as I grew up as a pastor's kid, and my next instinct is, I grew up as a pastor's kid. I just remember praying for 10 minutes as I was convinced that it was a supernatural or demonic event. Endured the screech for 10 grueling minutes as to my relief had ended suddenly, and it didn't fade out, or just go quiet either. The loud ring literally just stopped in an instant. I can't describe the feeling in their car when it stopped, to it is just so strange to look back and remember that I felt internally that the ordeal was over since the ring stopped. What I mean is that everything just felt normal again. The panic, the chills, all of that went away in an instant. We ended up down the road another 45 minutes away and finally stopped at a trucker diner. We slept in the parking lot. Or at least she did, as I was still too on edge from the adrenaline dumping that I just went through in attempted bravery. The next day, we went back to the campsite as the sun was up. We investigated, but we saw no tracks or anything except for the contents of the tent tossed around but still accounted for. I was hoping I guess that they were missing so that I could write it off as people screwing with us and plundering our tent. But that didn't seem to be the case. We were packed up and go on in less than 10 minutes as the area still felt really weird. But after that, I haven't been camping since. I would go again. But next time I'm gonna go with an RV, or at least a relatively known location with others around. This place was the remote mountains of Pace in Arizona, far from civilization, and it's one place that I won't be going again. This was a few years ago, but I thought that I would share it, because to this day it's one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Basically, a few years ago, my sister lived in this house here. It was a huge house too. 3 stories with 5 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. At the time, my sister was the only one living there, so all the other rooms were vacant. My sister's bedroom was on the ground floor next to the kitchen, and one night I was staying there with her. She'd gone to bed a couple of hours ago and I was suffering with insomnia at the time, so I was in the kitchen talking on the phone with a friend. It was about 3 in the morning. Yeah, well, I was on the phone. I just got this horrible, overwhelming feeling of being watched. It was like someone was in the room with me, and whatever it was did not want me there. I tried to ignore it, thinking that I was just being silly, and continued my conversation for a few minutes. But it got to a point where I straight up just did not feel safe in that room anymore, so I told my friend that I was going to bed, and I hung up the phone. I went into my sister's room, and she'd always told me to lock the door behind me, even when there was nobody else in the house. It was a standard lock that just had to be turned. So, I did that. And then I grabbed my blanket and I laid on the floor to sleep. I must have only laid there for maybe a minute or two when I heard the sound of the lock clicking in the door, creaking open. And suddenly that feeling of dread was back. It took me a minute, but I finally built up the courage to turn around and check. The door was wide open while I was staring. At the door I couldn't see anything, but I could literally feel something there watching me. Just as I was frozen, I finally managed to reach my hand out to shake my sister awakened. She had to get up and close and lock the door because I just physically couldn't move out of fear. I had a lot of experiences in that house, but that by far was the scariest to me. Because quite honestly, that night I felt like I was about to die, so my father and uncle have a story of living as outsiders or non-natives. Caucasian young people on their reservation, their tale was of experiencing a skinwalker. My grandma taught school on the reservation, and they lived well off compared to the natives living there. But from what I know, there's a lot of law surrounding the Navajo Nation non-natives, primarily older generations keeping their experiences and stories left unspoken, especially to those not from the culture. Forgive me too if I'm mistaken in any of this, or the culture, ideology, practices, or any other part. I'm just trying to tell the story that my family has only spoken to me, and whispers about my grandmother, father, and uncle lived there for a few years, and their experience was much different than the Navajo people who lived there for generations upon generations. And I just want to tell their story and get insiders to anyone else who has lived in that community. And any other story some people might be willing to share. So my father and uncle are about 2 years apart. In age, they lived in Navajo Mountain in the 1980s, and my dad was 10 to 12 and my uncle younger. And as it goes, they were always outside riding bikes with their friends, natives of the reservation. But my grandma was recovering from an abusive relationship with their father. It wasn't too concerned with their whereabouts being. It was a small community, there wasn't much trouble around. Nor would they know what real trouble was at that age. Trouble wasn't the issue to young white boys on a reservation then, but pure terror. It was a typical night without any parental supervision. The night was colder than usual, and the night sky was blacker than you could imagine in such a desolate place. The stars in the sky would light the night. But this night was as if the earth had moved to a different dimension and abyss. Even the boys raced each other, as they did every night, until they were compelled to force their brakes in unison, that they simultaneously looked up. Each boy's face melted from carefree innocent and adolescent to unadulterated horror. The boys stood motionless, grasping their bikes with every nerve, muscle, and strength in their body, on the dirt road, because to the right of them was a mesayon that they rode by every day, the mesa that paralleled from my family's home, the mesa that they could see through my father and uncle's bedroom every night. This mesa would become fear and nightmare to them from this night forward, because at the top of the mesa was a roaring fire taller than any bonfire that someone could assemble, bigger than a group of people could assemble. It raged, and was unbelievable. It was almost as tall as the mesa itself. More unbelievable, though, was the pitch-black figure seen cavorting around the bonfire. The native boys with my father and uncle informed them that this was not a typical Navajo dance or ritual. Either pits began to form in their stomachs. Friends of my father and uncle turned back around without a word and bolted back to their homes. My father and uncle threw their bikes to the ground and ran across the unpaved road into their home. The two came back in a panic, relaying what they'd seen to my grandmother, but she was unconcerned for the most part. It was apparently a legend of the natives, she told them, and chewed them away. They laid awake all night in their shed room that night, not saying a word to one another. They forced their curtains to close as much as they could, too scared to look out the window and see what they shouldn't have to begin. With neither could shake the images burnt into their memory, but the sun managed to reach and peek through into their entire room. Eventually, a sense of release washed over them as the darkness